It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon. The kind where the sun casts a golden glow on the water, the air is warm but not suffocating, and everything just feels right. He had worked hard for this home, this pool, this little slice of peace in a world that too often tried to push him down. But today that peace was shattered. At first he thought he was seeing things. A woman, someone he had never met, was lounging by his pool as if she owned the place. Legs stretched out, sunglasses perched on her nose, sipping a drink like she belonged there. Confusion hit him first. Was she a friend of a neighbor? Had someone given her permission? But no, there was no mistaking that smug, entitled expression. She knew exactly what she was doing. Still, he gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe there had been a mistake. Maybe she had the wrong house. So he approached, keeping his voice calm, measured. "Excuse me, ma'am, I think you might be at the wrong place." She barely glanced at him. Just a flick of her eyes before she took another sip of her drink. "Oh no, I'm right where I need to be," she said, her voice dripping with arrogance. A small laugh escaped him, not from amusement but from sheer disbelief. "This is my house," he said, gesturing around. "This is my pool." Now she looked at him properly, pulling down her sunglasses just enough to give him a once-over. And then came that look. That look he had seen too many times before. The one that questioned his very existence in a place like this. The one that silently asked, "How could someone like you afford this?" She scoffed, shaking her head. "Oh sure. Your house," she said, dragging out the words like they were some kind of joke. His jaw tightened. He had been here before, in different ways, different places. The cashier who double-checked his bills like they had to be fake. The neighbor who clutched her purse a little tighter when he walked by. The security guard who trailed him in a store, convinced he was up to no good. But this was something new. This woman wasn't just questioning him. She was claiming his space as her own. "Ma'am," he said, his patience thinning, "I'm going to need you to leave." She waved a hand lazily, like swatting away a fly. "Calm down. It's just a pool. What's the big deal?" The big deal? The big deal was that this wasn't about water or a lounge chair or a sunny afternoon. This was about respect. About boundaries. About the unspoken rule that some people thought they could take whatever they wanted and never face the consequences. She stretched her arms, letting out a sigh like he was the one inconveniencing her. "You don't have to be so aggressive," she muttered. "It's not like you own the neighborhood." His blood ran cold. There it is. That little slip. That little clue. She wasn't just here because she thought the pool was nice. She was here because she didn't think he belonged. She was here because, in her mind, a black man in a house like this had to be some kind of mistake. He took a step closer, no longer trying to mask his frustration. "Get out." For the first time she hesitated. He saw it in her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty, of surprise that he wasn't backing down, wasn't laughing it off, wasn't letting her win. But then just as quickly she recovered. "You don't have to be rude," she snapped, standing up and grabbing her things. "You people are always so hostile. You people." The words burned. Not because they were unexpected but because they were so predictable. So exhausting. He had heard them before, in different ways, in different tones, but always with the same meaning. As she sauntered toward the gate, she threw one last glance over her shoulder. "I was just enjoying the pool," she said, as if he was the one in the wrong. "It's not like I hurt anyone." And then she was gone. Just like that. But the anger, the disbelief, the sting of the moment, that stayed. Something had to change. He stood there for a moment, gripping the edge of a pool chair, trying to steady his breathing. His heart wasn't racing, but there was something heavy pressing against his chest. It wasn't just what she said, it was the way she said it. The casual entitlement. The complete disregard. Like this was just another day for her, another moment where she could take what she wanted and walk away like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Because this wasn't just about a pool. It wasn't even just about race, though that was a poison laced through every word she spoke. This was about something deeper. A pattern he had seen his whole life. The way some people believed rules didn't apply to them. The way they took and took, never thinking about who they were taking from. He had worked too hard to let this slide. It wasn't about the money, though that was its own battle. He had poured years of sweat and sacrifice into building a life that no one could take from him. Long nights, early mornings, moments where he wasn't sure if he'd ever make it. And then, when he finally did, when he finally had the kind of home people dream of, someone like her had the audacity to act like he didn't deserve it. He closed his eyes for a second, forcing himself to breathe. It wasn't the first time someone had tested him like this. He thought back to the job interview where they assumed he was the delivery guy, not the applicant. The store where he was told the affordable section was in the back before he even had a chance to speak. The time a cop pulled him over and the first question out of his mouth was, "Whose car is this?" He had learned over time to pick his battles. To know when to let things go and when to stand his ground. And this was a battle worth fighting. Because it wasn't just about her. It was about what would happen if he let it slide. If she could do this once, she'd do it again. Maybe not here, maybe not to him, but to someone else. And he couldn't let that happen. He turned and walked back inside, his mind racing. He needed to think, to figure out the right way to handle this. The law was on his side, of course. Trespassing was trespassing. He could have called the cops right then and there. But he knew how that would play out. She would cry. She would play the victim. She would twist the story until she was the one who had been wronged. He could already hear it in his head. I was just relaxing and he started yelling at me. He scared me. He was so aggressive. No, he wouldn't give her that chance. He sat down, rubbing his hands together, staring at the water. He had a decision to make. He could be the bigger person, let it go, move on. That's what people always told him to do. Ignore it. Don't make waves. But he was tired of that. Tired of being the one who had to swallow his pride while people like her did whatever they wanted. No, he wasn't going to let this go. He didn't know exactly how yet, but one thing was clear. She was going to regret ever thinking she could walk into his space and claim it as her own. He didn't rush. He didn't act out of anger. No, he was done letting people like her push him into a corner where he had to react emotionally. This time he would be smart. This time he would make sure that when she realized her mistake, there would be no way for her to twist the story. He spent the rest of the afternoon thinking, planning. He could have easily called the police and reported her for trespassing, but he already knew how that would go. She'd turn on the tears, play the helpless victim, and suddenly, he would be the one answering questions. No, he needed something better. That's when the idea hit him. If she wanted to act like she owned the place, he'd let her. But on his terms. The next morning he woke up early. He didn't know if she'd be bold enough to come back, but something told him she wasn't the type to back down easily. He had seen the arrogance in her eyes. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't ashamed. She genuinely believed she had every right to be there. So he got ready. He made sure everything was in place. And then he waited. Sure enough, just before noon she showed up again. This time she wasn't even trying to be subtle. She strolled in like she owned the place, towel over her shoulder, phone in hand, acting like this was her vacation spot. He watched from inside, shaking his head. She didn't even hesitate. She walked right over to the same lounge chair, dropped her things and sat down with a satisfied sigh. Unbelievable. But this time things would be different. He walked out onto the patio, making sure she saw him. She barely looked up. "You're back," he said, voice calm, measured. She glanced at him over her sunglasses, completely unbothered. "Yeah. Thought I'd get some sun." He tilted his head, studying her. She really wasn't going to acknowledge what she was doing. Not even a hint of embarrassment. Just pure, unchecked entitlement. "You know," he said, sitting down across from her, "I thought a lot about what happened yesterday." She finally gave him her full attention, raising an eyebrow. "Oh. I realized something," he continued, keeping his tone casual. "You must really love this pool." She let out a short laugh, crossing her legs. "It's a nice pool." He nodded. "It is. And you must feel really comfortable here. Comfortable enough to walk onto someone else's property, twice, without permission." Her smile faltered for a split second before she recovered. "I don't see what the big deal is," she said with a shrug. "You're making this a whole thing when it's really not." He leaned back, studying her. "You're right," he said. "It's not a big deal. Which is why I don't mind at all." Now that got her attention. Her eyebrows knitted together in confusion. "Wait, what?" He smiled. "Yeah. If you love this pool so much, who am I to stop you?" He gestured around. "Go ahead. Stay as long as you like." Her suspicion was immediate. He could see the wheels turning in her head. This wasn't the reaction she expected. "You serious?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "Completely." He leaned forward slightly. "But just so you know, I made a few changes." She stiffened. "Changes?" He nodded. "You see, I thought about what happened yesterday and I realized that maybe you just really need a place to relax. And I wouldn't want to be selfish and keep all this to myself." He smiled. "So, I decided to make my pool public." Her eyes widened slightly. "What do you mean, public?" He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times. "Well, since you clearly think this is a community space, I figured, why not? I put up a few posts online. Shared the address. Let people know that anyone is welcome to come by and use the pool. No charge. Her mouth parted slightly. You're joking. He turned the screen toward her. And there it was. Multiple posts. Social media, local community boards, everywhere. Free pool day. Everyone welcome. No membership, no restrictions, just bring your own towel. Her face turned red. You didn't. I did, he said, sitting back with a satisfied look. Almost on cue, they heard voices coming from the front. Then laughter. Then footsteps. She turned her head sharply, just in time to see the first group of people arriving. A family with kids. A group of teenagers with floaties. A few older folks looking like they were ready to settle in for the afternoon. Her whole body tensed. You invited strangers to your house? She hissed. Well, I figured since you already made yourself at home, why not let everyone enjoy it? He gave her an innocent look. Unless, you think you deserve special treatment? She was speechless. People started filtering in, setting up their things, jumping into the pool, chatting, laughing. Within minutes, the entire place had transformed. She stood up abruptly, grabbing her things. This is insane, she muttered. Leaving already? He asked, feigning disappointment. She shot him a glare. You're crazy. He smiled. No, I just believe in sharing. She stormed past him, pushing her way through the crowd. As she reached the gate, he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear, Hey! You're welcome back anytime. She didn't even look back. And just like that, she was gone. The moment she realized she had made a mistake was almost too perfect. Her confidence, her entitlement, it all crumbled in an instant. The smirk that had been plastered on her face earlier was gone, replaced by something much more satisfying, fear. Not fear for her safety because he had never threatened her. No, this was a different kind of fear. The kind that comes when someone realizes they're finally facing consequences for their actions. She stood there, gripping her phone like it was a lifeline, her fingers tightening around it as she scanned the area. Her eyes darted back and forth, searching for an escape. But there wasn't one. Not this time. She had walked into someone else's space, claimed it as her own, and now she was watching as that space fought back. She had spent so much time believing she could do whatever she wanted. That people like him wouldn't push back. That her words, her presence, were enough to control the situation. But she had underestimated him. She had thought this would end the way so many other moments like this had ended, with her getting away with it. But not today. She tried to argue, to spin the story in her favor. I didn't mean anything by it, she stammered, her voice cracking. It was just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. That was always the excuse. It was never about what she had done, it was always about how other people misinterpreted it. It was never about her stepping over the line, it was about how people overreacted. But this wasn't something that could be twisted. This wasn't something she could erase with a fake apology and a forced smile. This was real. This was happening. Her eyes flickered toward the gate, toward the street beyond it. She was thinking about running. But even if she left, she knew this wasn't over. This wasn't just about the moment she had walked onto his property. This was about everything that had led her to believe she could in the first place. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control. And she knew it. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to argue. He didn't even need to say much at all. The weight of what was happening was speaking for itself. The reality that, for once, she couldn't just walk away without consequences was sinking in. The people who had always defended her, the ones who would have usually come rushing in to make excuses for her behavior, they weren't here now. She was alone. And for the first time, she was facing the truth of her own actions without a safety net. She took a shaky breath, her confidence completely shattered. The power she had walked in with was gone. And now she had to live with the fact that, for once, she wasn't the one who won.